I never thought my life would turn into the plot of one of the dramatic series I love watching. Those shows where every character's life is a tangled mess of secrets, lies, and betrayal always suck me in. Who knew I'd end up living one of those stories? Here I am, years old, the owner of a small but honest service station. I've been married to Sarah, a year-old office secretary, for 5 years. Like many marriages, ours was nothing extraordinary. We had our highs and lows, but always managed to find our way back to each other. Until now, it all started when financial trouble hit my business. Issues with landlords and a canceled lease agreement forced me to start looking for new partners to keep the station afloat. In the meantime, Sarah decided she needed to step in and support us financially. She found a job as a secretary at a small office on the west side of town. She was ecstatic when she got hired after her first interview. I was relieved, too. At least one of us had some stability while I scrambled to keep my business alive. From the first day, Sarah seemed genuinely happy with her new job. She came home that evening, buzzing about how kind the people were and how great her boss, Patrick, was. I didn't think much of it. She was always a friendly person, so making a good impression came naturally to her. The next day, I decided to surprise her by picking her up from work. I parked outside, excited to see how she was settling in. But when I walked into the office, I saw her sitting across from a man who could only be Patrick. They were laughing and sharing a cup of coffee like old friends. Sarah noticed me standing there and introduced us. Patrick stood up, extending his hand, exuding a confidence that made me feel instantly out of place. He was probably around my age, but polished in a way I wasn't. We exchanged pleasantries, and then Sarah and I left. In the car, I asked her about their little coffee break, trying to sound casual. She told me her trolley bus had broken down that morning, and she arrived late. Nervous about making a bad impression, she explained. Patrick had called her to his office, but instead of reprimanding her, he suggested they talk over coffee. He's really understanding, she said, smiling. I wanted to trust her, and I did for the most part. The following weeks were uneventful, or so I thought. Sarah enjoyed her work, and I was making progress on resolving my business problems. One evening over dinner, I told her the good news. I'd found a solution to keep the station running. You don't have to keep working now, I said, expecting her to jump at the chance to quit. But to my surprise, she shook her head. I like it there, she said. It's not just about the money anymore. That was the first time I felt a pang of something. Doubt. Maybe. Over the next few weeks, things started to shift. Sarah began staying late more often, citing team building events or urgent deadlines. She was quieter at home, always preoccupied. One night while we were watching TV, her phone buzzed on the couch beside me. Before I could glance at it, she snatched it up and clutched it to her chest like it was a state secret. What was that about? I asked. Nothing, she said sharply. You don't need to look at my phone. That's my private space. We fought about it, but she wouldn't budge. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. I started paying closer attention. She never left her phone unattended anymore, a habit completely unlike her. One night, I decided to check her phone while she was sleeping. But when I finally had my chance, there was nothing to find. No suspicious chats, no incriminating photos. It was too clean. It felt like someone who had something to hide had gone to great lengths to hide it. Suspicion was eating away at me. I began considering things I never thought I'd do, like following her to work or hiring a private investigator. But I convinced myself to wait, to let things play out. Things had started to look better. And for a while, I convinced myself that my suspicions were nothing more than paranoia. Sarah and I were talking more, even laughing at dumb jokes over dinner like we used to. She seemed genuinely interested in what was going on with the service station. I thought maybe we turned a corner. I felt stupid for doubting her. But hey, marriages hit rough patches, right? Then came that Saturday afternoon. She told me she had to go to work, claiming there was some issue with a foreign client that required immediate attention. The way she said it rubbed me the wrong way. Too rehearsed. Too convenient. My gut told me not to let this slide. So I decided to follow her. If she really was working, I'd laugh at myself for being overly suspicious. If she wasn't, well, I needed to know the truth. I stayed far enough behind her not to be noticed and watched as she pulled up to a fancy restaurant on the edge of town. A restaurant didn't exactly scream, urgent work issue, but I decided to hang back and see what was going on. Maybe there was some kind of team lunch or client meeting, though a part of me knew better. I parked down the street and made my way to a vantage point where I could keep an eye on her. She sat down at a table with her boss, Patrick. Just the two of them. They were deep in conversation, and the way she leaned in with that familiar smile made my stomach churn. My first instinct was to storm over and demand answers, but before I could act, two other men in suits joined them. The mood shifted. Papers were pulled out, pens started moving, and the energy around the table turned professional. I clenched my fists, feeling both relief and anger. Maybe I was just being paranoid again. Maybe this really was work-related. But the fact that she hadn't mentioned it to me, or worse, the fact that she'd made it sound like an emergency, still didn't sit right. I left without confronting her, telling myself I was overthinking everything. To calm my nerves, I stopped at a nearby tavern. One drink turned into two, and before long, I was deep in my cups. A part of me hated myself for turning to booze to escape my thoughts, but the alcohol dulled the edge of my frustration and doubt. I was too drunk to care about much of anything. I barely made it to bed before passing out. When I woke up the next morning, Sarah was gone. I assumed she'd left for work early, but she hadn't said anything about her schedule changing. I shrugged it off and decided to focus on my own day. It wasn't like I could change anything at that moment. Work started out normal enough. I was inspecting cars, directing my mechanics, and generally keeping busy. A white station wagon pulled into the lot. A tall, blonde woman stepped out, radiating a sort of confident elegance that immediately caught my attention. She explained that her car was making strange noises and asked if I could take a look. Wanting to impress her for reasons I didn't entirely understand, I personally inspected the car. After poking around under the chassis, I told her it would take some time to figure out the issue. "Leave me your number, and I'll call you once we've pinpointed the problem," I said, holding out my phone. She hesitated for a moment before typing in her number. Her eyes flicked to the screensaver on my phone, a photo of me and Sarah from a few years back. I saw her expression shift, just slightly, but she didn't say anything. It was a fleeting moment, but it stuck with me. Did she recognize Sarah? Or was I imagining things? Later that evening, after my team had fixed her car, I called to let her know it was ready for pickup. She arrived within half an hour, thanked me politely, and drove off. As she pulled out of the lot, I had the nagging feeling that I'd seen her car somewhere before, but I couldn't place it. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe I'd been too distracted by her presence to think clearly. When I got home, the fragile piece Sarah and I had rebuilt shattered. She was in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone, and I decided I couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Do you even realize how distant you've been lately?" I blurted out. "You disappear for hours, you barely talk to me, and I've been eating fast food all week because you're never here to cook or even care. What the hell is going on, Sarah?" She froze for a moment before turning to face me. Her expression darkened. "Excuse me? You think I owe you dinner and a pressed shirt? You're unbelievable, Alex." The argument escalated quickly. She accused me of being controlling and ungrateful, and I accused her of prioritizing everything else, work, her boss, God knows what, over our marriage. Her voice rose to a shout, loud enough that I was sure the neighbors could hear every word. Then, without warning, she grabbed her coat, slammed the door, and stormed out. I called her several times, but she didn't pick up. Eventually, she sent me a text. No apology, no explanation, just cold detachment. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. What had happened to us? What had happened to her? I wanted to believe this was just a rough patch, but deep down I knew better. And that nagging feeling about the blonde woman and her station wagon wouldn't leave me alone. Something about it didn't add up, and I couldn't shake the idea that it was all connected somehow. The house was too quiet without Sarah. She'd been gone for 3 days, and I was spiraling. Every text I sent was met with silence. My calls went unanswered, and when I tried to find out which friend she was staying with, I got nothing. It was like she'd vanished into thin air. Every minute that passed fed the gnawing pit in my stomach. Was she okay? Was she with someone else? The uncertainty was maddening. By the third morning, I was running on fumes. No sleep, no appetite, just raw nerves. That's when I heard it, banging on the front door. At first, I thought maybe Sarah had finally come home, but the knocking was too aggressive. Then came the shouting. "Open the damn door. I know you're in there." The voice was sharp, angry, and unmistakably female. My mind raced. Who the hell could this be? I threw on a shirt and hurried to the door, ready for anything but what I found. It was her, blonde woman from the station wagon. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both clearly caught off guard. Her presence on my doorstep made no sense. Why was she here? And why was she so angry? She looked ready to say something, but her words seemed caught in her throat. I finally broke the silence. Can I help you?" The question felt stupid the second it left my mouth. But what else was I supposed to say? She sighed, crossing her arms tightly over her chest, and muttered something under her breath before glancing at the ground. "Look, can I come in?" "It's complicated," she finally said. It had been raining that morning, and she was drenched. Her hair clung to her face, and her tank top was soaked through, outlining her figure in a way I couldn't ignore. I gestured for her to come inside, grabbing a towel on the way to the living room. I handed it to her, then offered coffee to break the tension. She accepted with a small nod. We sat on the couch, her curled into one corner and me in the other, the silence growing heavier with each passing second. She sipped her coffee, staring at the floor like she was working up the courage to say something, but nothing came. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about the strangeness of the situation. Her appearance, her anger, her connection to Sarah, or lack thereof. What was she doing here? Our eyes met suddenly. It felt like the air in the room shifted. Neither of us looked away. The intensity of her gaze sent a jolt through me, and before I knew it, she leaned in. I should have stopped her. I should have said something. But the truth is, I didn't want to. Her lips met mine, and in that moment, all my doubts and frustrations melted away. It was the kind of kiss that makes you forget everything else. Electric, desperate, alive. We didn't say a word. Just let the moment carry us. One kiss turned into another, then another, and soon, restraint became a distant memory. I don't know how much time passed. At some point, we moved from the couch to the bedroom, and the intensity of everything left me feeling like a completely different person. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't weighed down by suspicion or heartbreak. I wasn't thinking about Sarah or her lies. I was just free. Exhaustion overtook us, and I drifted off into a deep, dreamless sleep. When I woke up, she was gone. No note, no goodbye, just an empty space where she'd been. It felt surreal, like waking from a vivid dream. But the crumpled sheets and faint scent of her perfume told me it had been very real. I spent the morning trying to piece my thoughts together. My emotions were all over the place. Guilt, excitement, confusion. What the hell had I done? I decided to push it out of my mind and focus on something normal, so I ordered some takeout and flipped on the TV hoping for a distraction. The knock on the door came sooner than I expected, and I assumed it was the delivery guy. I grabbed some cash and opened the door without checking. It wasn't the delivery guy. Sarah stood there, looking fresh and composed as if she hadn't ghosted me for 3 days. She smiled casually, kissed me on the cheek, and stepped inside like nothing had happened. "Hey, babe," she said, setting her bag down on the counter. "I'm starving. Did you order something?" I stood frozen in the doorway, stunned by her nonchalance. She acted like this was any other day, like she hadn't ignored my texts, my calls, or the fact that she'd vanished without an explanation. My shock quickly turned to anger. "Sarah," I said, my voice tight, "where the hell have you been?" She sighed, almost as if she was annoyed I was asking. "I told you I needed some time to myself. I went to the dacha to clear my head." "The dacha?" I repeated. "For 3 days? Without telling me? Do you know how worried I was?" Her expression softened slightly, and she walked over, placing a hand on my arm. "I'm sorry, Alex. I didn't mean to scare you. I needed space. Things have been so tense lately. I felt like I was suffocating. I thought if I could get away for a bit, I'd come back feeling better." Her apology sounded sincere, but the timing felt too convenient. My mind flashed back to the blonde woman, her kiss, her anger. Was Sarah really at the dacha? Or was this another carefully constructed lie? We didn't talk about it again that night. I couldn't bring myself to push the issue, and Sarah seemed eager to move on, as if nothing had happened. She even cooked dinner, something she hadn't done in weeks, and acted unusually affectionate. But as we sat there eating, the questions in my head refused to quiet. Where had she really been? Why had the blonde woman shown up on my doorstep? And what connection did she have to Sarah? And most importantly, could I keep pretending everything was fine when the cracks in our marriage were growing deeper by the day? The next morning, I woke up to a message on my phone from Elizabeth, the blonde woman who had come to my house just days before. It simply read, "Let's meet. PM at DeLuca's Coffee. I have something important to tell you." I stared at the message for a long time, wondering if this was the next twist in what had already become a mess of lies and betrayals. I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever she had to say, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, got the better of me. I texted back a quick, "I'll be there," and spent the rest of the day in a fog of anticipation. I was at the cafe, seated in a corner booth with a black coffee in front of me, my nerves on edge. At precisely PM, the door opened, and there she was. Elizabeth looked stunning, her presence commanding attention as she confidently walked toward my table. Yet there was something in her expression, anxiety, sadness, that made my chest tighten. She slid into the seat across from me, sighed, and began to speak. "The truth is," Elizabeth started, her voice steady but tinged with pain. "When I showed up at your house that day, I wasn't looking for you. I was looking for your wife." My stomach churned as she continued, every word slicing through me. "She's been seeing my husband," she said. "This isn't his first affair, but this time, something felt different. He started acting strangely, disappearing without explanation, avoiding conversations. I couldn't take it anymore, so I hired a private investigator." Elizabeth reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the table between us. Inside are the messages, call logs, photos, videos, everything the PI collected. "The day I came to your house was the same day I got her name and address. I was so angry I drove straight there, but you were the one who answered the door." I opened the folder, my hands trembling. The contents confirmed everything I'd been afraid to admit to myself. Sarah wasn't just distant, was unfaithful. The weight of my suspicions lifted, replaced by the cold, sharp sting of reality. Elizabeth and I talked for what felt like hours, piecing together the timelines of our spouses' betrayals. We swapped stories about their odd behavior, their excuses, their late nights. It was strange, almost surreal, to find solace in someone else's heartbreak. But amidst the pain, a shared determination began to take shape. "I don't want a screaming match or some big public blow-up," I said firmly. "I want cold, calculated revenge. They don't deserve to control how this ends." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed and a small smile tugged at her lips. "I like the way you think," she said. We agreed to file for divorce at the same time, using the evidence she had gathered to seal the deal. It was a clean, decisive plan. The next day, we both met with our respective lawyers, setting the wheels in motion. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control over my life. Later that evening, I invited Elizabeth to my garage to celebrate. It felt fitting to mark the beginning of the end where I felt most at ease. Among the smell of oil and the hum of machinery, I picked up some takeout and a bottle of wine, and we spent the night talking, laughing, and sharing stories about everything that had led us to this point. The tension between us was undeniable. At first, it was subtle, longer eye contact, a brush of her hand against mine as she passed the tool. But as the hours wore on, it became impossible to ignore. At some point, the conversation took a turn. What had started as shared frustration about our spouses turned into something more intimate. She leaned closer, her voice soft, and I felt myself drawn to her in a way I couldn't explain. Before I knew it, we were kissing, the kind of kiss that makes the world fade away. It was raw, passionate, and completely consuming. One thing led to another, and soon we found ourselves tangled together on the hood of a car. It was reckless and impulsive, but for once I didn't care about the consequences. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Sarah or her lies. I was just living in the moment. But then the sound of the garage door opening snapped us back to reality. I turned my head just in time to see him. Patrick, standing in the doorway, his face twisted in a mix of shock and pain as he took in the scene before him. For a moment, none of us moved. Then, without a word, Patrick turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Elizabeth and I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. And then, as if by unspoken agreement, we continued where we'd left off. Whatever guilt or second thoughts we might have had disappeared in the heat of the moment. That night marked the beginning of something neither of us had planned. What started as a shared pain had turned into something unexpected. A connection born out of betrayal, but burning with its own intensity. Our lives were messy, complicated, and far from perfect. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be.